Okay, 5 seconds later. So in that last video, I was trying to offer a contrast between having a very solid sense of self, like almost burdened by self, versus having these, having gaining some freedom from the shackles of self, whether it's getting out of self, having a sense of self thinned out, and so on. Now, I would say that these moments when the self has thinned out are the times, for most of us, when we feel most in tune with life, with the universe, with things as they are, because we're not burdened by all our likes and dislikes. And by the way, a synonym for self for some might be ego. Yeah, so if you were to go back to the last video and replace the word self with ego, then I think everything I said would sort of apply. And ego, my favorite definition of ego that I ever heard was from Pema Chodron, who said ego is like a room that's made just according to your preferences. So if it's painted or colored in any way, it's colored in your favorite colors, colors you like. If there's music playing, it only plays music you like. If there's anybody in that room, it's people you like. Uh, if there's food, it's food that you like or love. Being able to live in such a room is ego, that is the experience of ego. And she described the spiritual life as beginning to poke little holes in the walls of this precious room so that the stink and stench of life can come in and begin to offend us and insult us. And slowly we put little holes so the more of life can enter in. And if we become advanced enough, we knock down a wall so life can just barge right in and offend us and make us upset. Like life is not going according to my wants. It's not going according to what I like. My life, I don't like my life. Right? And she would say, like, that's the spiritual life. That's the spiritual life is inviting inviting what we like, but also equally inviting all that we don't like. And there's a well-known poem by Rumi called The Guest House that has this theme. And if you've never come across it, I really recommend that poem. You could Google The Guest House by Rumi. And these are all ideas I've talked about in one of my books. But so where was I going? So this idea of ego, yeah. So ego is, in other words, her definition of ego is living in accordance with our preferences and trying to cater all situations to align favorably with our preferences. That's ego, that's self. And so again, one could, to me, that sort of fits in with what I described earlier as self and ego as the collection of my likes and dislikes, my thoughts, my wishes, my hopes, fears, and so on. That's self. And when I experience freedom from self, there's something fresh and wonderful about it. And I would say that perhaps that is the essential experience that most of us are seeking in life, is this thinning away of self, whether it's through sacrifice. So for example, I've long thought discipline as a wonderful way to thin the self. And so now going back to the original overarching topic of the scenic route versus the meditative or meditative spiritual route, the meditative route, when we meditate, so again, using walking meditation as an example, I'm focused, I'm bringing my attention upon the sensation of my feet touching the ground. Now, my foot touches the ground. In the second or two between my right foot and my left foot touching the ground, there's a gap. Within that gap, I can easily be thinking, oh, I really want to buy something later today at the store. And then that thought might carry me to, oh, I really like this store, and that other store sucks. And before I know it, I've taken 5-10 steps just lost in thought. Now, if I'm taking the scenic route, I might run with that thought for the entire walk. or for 10, 20 minutes and miss out on half the scenery, but carried away in that thought. But in the meditative walk, at some point I'm going to catch myself, and let's say it's 10 seconds later, I have to drop the whole narrative, the whole story, and bring my attention back to the sensation of my foot touching the ground. And there's a kind of a discipline in that. And I would say that every form of discipline is a way to counter the construction of new stories, the generation of all these stories that just come, the thoughts that, but it's not just one singular thought. It's a thought that leads to another thought that leads to another thought. So it's a thought train. It's just a bunch of, this thought leads to this car, leads to that car, leads to that thought, etc. This thought car, this thought. So it's a long train of thoughts. And so I would say in normal living, for most of us, we just sort of run away with these long thought trains. But when we have a discipline like walking meditation or sitting meditation where we're focused on our breath, we constantly are just bringing ourselves back to an anchor. And that anchor cuts the construction of these narratives. In other words, it cuts the construction of self. But of course, the self, at least as I've observed it within my own consciousness, immediately, promptly begins building up, but then it's cut down again. Builds up, it's cut down. Comes up, it's cut down. Comes up, and then I get carried away with it because it's an enticing story, and then I remember, oh, it gets cut down. So it's almost like saying, you're not important, you're not important, you're not important, you're not important. And gradually, the constructive act of self slows down, and it thins out. And pretty soon the sense of self is less. And when it's less, one is more, life is more freshly available around us. And we come closer to the experience of looking out at an amazing thing of literature, not an amazing piece of literature, or even like reading a poem or mathematical proof where there's this unexpected yet surprising and unexpected, surprising, same thing, unexpected yet beautiful turn of thought. And we're like, wow, it's so beautiful. There's something so sublime in that turn of thought. And we're struck. We're kind of struck by it. We don't cause it. We're struck by it. Just like nature, we're struck by it. The aesthetic experiences that we're struck by the experience. In love, we can't make ourselves fall in love. We don't control it. Love just happens. We're struck by love. Yeah, and in meditation, we don't really just like enter some deep state. The deep state sort of hits us, and we're struck by that state, and it kind of hits us, and suddenly something wakes up in that moment. And so all these things, what was the other example I talked about? Maybe the flow state. We don't make the flow state, we just engage with a challenge and we focus, and the flow state strikes us. We just find ourselves in it. And so I would say this is another variable at play between these two ways of walking, that in the meditative walk, there's a discipline that's being applied, and the discipline is cutting short the constant narratives that the mind is formulating, moment to moment to moment. And in cutting these narratives, it's cutting the construction or the proliferation of self. And the self thins out, and one comes closer to sort of reality, to things as they are. And so those are three factors that occurred to me as to why I noticed that the meditative walk, that's a monotonous rectangle in my neighborhood, has never struck me as boring, and it hasn't invoked a sense of very subtle restlessness of, I need to change something, I need to see something better, I need to explore something. That doesn't occur. It's, oh, this is the path, this is the practice, and there's sufficient pleasure of mind, there's sufficient joy, and there's a sufficient sense of experiencing life that's deep enough and that's profound, that's fresh and deep enough to not need to change something, to not need to make an extra right turn or left. I'm not saying making an extra right turn or left turn is bad, But I'm saying there's a difference between just taking it because one has a reason to take it or just for no reason versus it being born out of a certain boredom or restlessness with what one has been doing. So I hope these videos have been informative or thought-provoking, and that's that.